What up? All my scientists, my artists, my philosophers, my geneticists, my roboticists, my biologists, my archaeologists, my astronomers. Let's get busy. This has been Busy from the Burbs. Chill.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Ben Busy from the Burbs, broadcasting to you from Osaka, Japan. I'm joined by my co-host, Zanish, in the house. What up, Zanish?
Hey, what's going on?
A lot's going on in France, as you know.
Yeah.
I didn't get to this too much. We briefly touched on it in my last podcast that I did with a good friend of mine. For many years, Jay the S, Jake the Snake, a.k.a. Snizza, a.k.a. Jake Check, who's an actor and musician in Hollywood. We didn't get a chance to really delve into it. On this episode, as I know you're a philosophical heavyweight, psychological heavyweight in my mind, I kind of defer to you when it comes to these topics. I want us to discuss this. And you had a topic in mind, specifically the psychology of what exactly? The psychology of who are we going to be talking about?
Well, the people who perpetrate acts of terror.
And whether they're domestic terrorists or
international, right?
Right. Okay, so this is like these are applicable across like domains or whatever, like doesn't matter who they are.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's the same root.
All right, so hit me with it. Like who are these people? Like, can they be identified? If so, like what's causing them to be this way? Is it just teenage angst like we've always had, or like I don't know, it's not teenage anymore, really, is it?
Well, you know, there is that kind of pressure, right, to prove yourself in the world immediately. Mm-hmm. To distinguish yourself from your parents.
Right.
And I suspect, anyway, at least, that when you're coming...
I suspect. I see what you did there.
Yeah.
What you did there.
Yeah, it is a suspicion, right?
Yeah.
And my suspicion is that when you're in a culture that is very religiously intolerant...
Saudi Arabia. Cough.
That you can't really be a rebel because that gets you killed.
Right.
So the only thing that you can do is kind of what the Puritans did to the Anglican Church in England, which is to out-moral the moral police. Mm-hmm. And so when you talk about radical Islam and radical interpretations and hadiths that push that line, I think that, I suspect anyway, that in Islam, the way to rebel against your parents is to shame them for not being as fundamentalist as you are.
I see.
And
I see.
Do you think that makes sense, though?
Well, what I'm wondering is, like, they're not... These people were living in Belgium and France at the time. They weren't living in... isolated, like, crazy Wahhabi, Sunni Islam dominated countries.
But do you think that might have given them even more imperative to commit the acts that they did? Look at the guy who shot up Virginia Tech and his manifesto and how he, like, talked about East or Western values and how everyone around him was, like, corrupt and morally bankrupt.
The South Korean guy.
Yeah, Cho was his name, I believe.
I don't even care. But,
right.
I mean, yeah, like, I understand. Like, obviously, if it's germane to the point, like, I care. But,
right.
You know what I mean? Like, I understand. Like, so what you're saying that it's like, it's always, it kind of, it comes from this moral, this perverse, like, twisted attempt to out-moralize.
Somebody, at least.
Somebody, right?
I mean that's always the point of separatist cults, though, isn't it? To return to a more fundamental
fundamentally
that,
pure state.
Right. I mean, that's starting with Martin Luther into Joseph Smith into the guy who founded the Jehovah's Witnesses. It's always like these guys have taken the message and they perverted it and they've gone the wrong way.
Right. Yeah.
And we need to go back to this more fundamental, raw, visceral interpretation. And I think that's, you know what I mean?
This is like Wahhabism has been alive for so many years. I'm wondering, like, why is it now? Like, I'm not saying that terrorism by Islamic extremists hasn't existed in the past, but this just seems like, because there's always been terrorism. I mean, there's been terrorism in France for years. I remember in the early 90s, there was this whole scare because they were putting bombs in the trash cans.
Right. Yeah, well, we have to go back to the, I believe it's the 1972 Olympics. Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with that?
Negative.
I believe it was, I'm not 100% sure on this, like I'm a little foggy on it now because I haven't read about it in forever, but I believe it was the people who ended up forming the PLO, which is the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which ended up being headed by Arafat, which are the people who ended up, you know what I mean? It's like that whole thing in the early to mid 2000s with Ariel Sharon and Arafat going back and forth, but I think that was the roots of it.
There was a lot of Palestinian acts of terror against a lot of different people during that time. And
but I think it was the first one, though. I think it was in the Munich Olympics.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, this is what the movie Munich is based on. Yeah, they took the Israeli
soccer,
yeah,
like the soccer team or something, and they killed 13 of them.
Yeah, that's.
I think that was the start of it.
So, like, what was the impetus there? The impetus there was that the Palestinians were feeling dispossessed of their land, right? Like, I don't know, they started the 6-Day War and lost it, and so Israel occupied the West Bank and the Gaza Strip.
And that's kind of been going on ever since, right?
And that's kind of been going on ever since, right? Like,
yeah.
I don't know, I'm trying to understand it, because in my mind, the Palestinian cause is distinct from whatever the fuck those guys in Paris were, you know, whatever they believed.
I'm kind of not up to date. Are they linked to ISIS, the people in Paris?
Yes. So it was a Daesh operation. I guess Daesh is like I had been kind of wanting to call them Daesh when I heard that it was a pejorative term that Muslims used to describe the terrorist group, but then no one else was using it. No one else was saying Daesh. Everyone kept saying ISIL, ISIS, and the reason why I didn't want to use that was because it legitimizes them, because it calls them a state. We shouldn't be referring to them as a state. It's like they've already won the fucking battle at that point if we address them.
It's kind of interesting that you mentioned that, because the Bush Jr. administration refused to sit down with Ahmadinejad because of that exact point, is that they felt like it would legitimize
the Iranian government. Like, that's
the Iranian government. Well, I mean, the Iranian government at that time, I don't think was a part of the UN. They were considered a rogue nation, along with North Korea and maybe a couple of others.
I think they were a part. They've been a part of the UN, I think, for
maybe I'm wrong. But that was the reason. That was the reasoning that they gave us. They didn't want to legitimize the theocracy that was seeking nuclear weaponry or whatever.
I mean, I know Bush had beef with Iran, and he called North Korea and Iran the quote-unquote axis of evil, and we threw Venezuela in there. Like,
well, you know, there's something interesting about that, though, and I'm not 100% sure that this is true, but this is the information that I've kind of gathered on the periphery, just going through things. It seems that France. Okay, so when we went into Iraq, like, the people the main voices who opposed it all had ulterior motives.
What do you mean by that?
So, from what I understand, the president of France was involved in helping Saddam Hussein cheat on the oil for food program, and it was involved with Kofi Annan, who was then the head of the UN. and he was like involved in that, and that Saddam owed Russia over $10 billion for arms.
Oh shit.
Well, I mean, there were reports, I recall, when we first went into Iraq that there were Russian operatives on the ground operating radar jamming equipment in the first days of Iraqi freedom. I don't know if either of those claims are true, but it's fascinating if they are.
It is fascinating to think. I heard similar things about Chinese units that were supposedly operating inside Iraq and Afghanistan as well.
Right. Well, I mean, I believe that I've read enough to think that it's true that Iran and Russia are black market trading partners for oil.
By black market, you mean they
against
trade
UN
with
sanctions.
each other and not with the United States.
Black market in that the UN has put sanctions against them, and Russia is part of the UN, and Russia is covertly trading with them in spite of those sanctions to which they're a part of.
Trading with China?
No, trading with Iran.
Oh, trading with Iran. Well, yeah, of course. Like, Russia definitely has Iran's back. I mean, I want to go back, though. You said that they had ulterior motives. You understand the fact that we had fucking ulterior motives as well, right?
I have no doubt about that.
Like Halliburton, Bechtel, the no-bid contracts, the whole thing, like opening it up for NGOs to go in there and make tons of money.
I don't mean to be a merchant of doubt by any means, but I've heard the argument forwarded that the reason that Halliburton was given those no-bid contracts is because literally no other company was qualified to fill those contracts.
I heard about that as well, but I mean, the fact that there were I don't know if that's true of the no-bid contracts, but I mean, I don't know. I just take issue with the fact that the vice president who had to abdicate his executiveship at that same company then goes on to fucking be able to engineer or seemingly engineer a conflict in which that company, which he has stock in, is like in such high demand. It's just so fucking sketch, you know?
Well, you know, it's also sketch that Condi Rice was a board member for Chevron.
That as well. Yeah, they named a fucking oil tanker after her.
Did they?
Yeah, the SS Condoleezza. It's actually in the fleet, in the Chevron fleet.
Well, you know, that doesn't exactly shock me.
No, but back to the modus operandi, the motivations for what compels someone to do something so fucking retarded. To literally just rake innocent people with AK-47 fire. Like, that's not even religious. That has nothing to do with religion. That is just homicidal mania. And what's frightening about it is that it happened in such great number. Like, this wasn't just in the United States. You have one, you have a lone wolf or lone operator or whatever they call them, lone gunman. And now, like in this case, this was a fucking military operation. This was like multiple people, multiple psychopaths executing a massacre. It just defies explanation. There's no way to square it. I can't square it. It doesn't make any sense to me. I understand it in the context of, okay, there were drone strikes that caused all this collateral damage. Countless innocents have died as a result of prosecuting this asymmetric war in places like Pakistan and Afghanistan and Iraq. But these were, I don't know where they came from, but I don't think these guys were directly affected by these drone strikes ever. I think these guys were, pretty well-to-do in that maybe that's not the case. Just because you're in Europe doesn't mean you're well-to-do. You know what I'm saying? Do you want to jump in here?
So, the thought that I have immediately is that let me ask you. Let me start this by asking you questions. Mm-hmm. Have you ever allowed yourself to be swayed by obvious propaganda?
Yeah, swayed in to what degree though? Like actually, like fundamentally convinced.
So let's just say you're listening to like Michael Savage. Do you remember who that guy is?
Yeah.
Let's say you listen to some of his bombastic, hyperbolic propaganda, and you feel yourself having an emotional reaction to it, even though your rational center says no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've experienced that before.
Right. So imagine that maybe you experience that, but your rational center is only 50% of the capacity of what it actually is.
That this joins in with that video that I was telling you about.
Right. I haven't seen it. So.
Did you watch it?
No, I don't think you linked me to it. Did you? If you did, I didn't watch it. But I think that like
ignorance
I
and
probably
poverty,
should have
man.
watched.
Ignorance and poverty.
Okay. Oh, you probably did link me to it.
Like I haven't linked you
12
to
hours ago. Oh, I have a link from you. That's from November 4th. Never mind.
Yeah, not it. Right. Ignorance and poverty is what gives rise to this. You're saying that if my rational faculty was at 50% of what it currently is, basically
and you were subjected to people who could emotionally sway you a little bit, even for a few seconds at your current capacity.
Imagine this is why religion is so dangerous, man. This is why it's so dangerous.
See, my problem still is that religion is just a symptom. It's
really
right. Remember the first conversation that we had where I was talking about how religion, because nationalism is just another form of religion, right? Any group identity has the same power. It's all systemic from the same kind of internal weakness.
Right. Excuse me.
Right. So when I think about it, and I think about, well, let's compare, for instance. I'll probably get some flack for this, but let's talk about radical Islamic teens and their reaction to their situation versus, say, African American gangbangers in the inner cities of America.
Okay.
So, obviously, I think that most liberally minded people think that it's a systemic reaction that leads to violence, right?
Right, poverty produces this.
But it's more than just poverty, right? It's the idea that legitimacy cannot be obtained.
Oh, wait, it's just this desperation, isn't it?
But if you look at Islam's position in the world versus, like, let's be real, like, what real Islamic nation is a major player in the World Trade Organization?
Look at, it's not just WTO, look at OPEC. OPEC is like the shadow UN. They have tons of power. They fuel the world. Like, OPEC decides what the price of oil is going to be, you know?
Right. But they're coerced.
Coerced by American military might?
Oh, absolutely. Like, look at so look at what happened in the 1970s and Jimmy Carter's oil boycott.
What, like OPEC?
Yeah, and so you should take a pause and look up the oil shortages in the 1970s and stagflation.
Okay.
Which is a cross between inflation and stagnation. But yeah, he boycotted. He told OPEC to go fuck themselves.
And they had enough power to be able to bring us back to the bargaining table, right? By basically driving up the price of oil. Like, they could charge whatever the fuck they wanted.
Well, here's the thing is that we won. We broke their backs, and that's why oil prices were dirt cheap through the 80s and 90s.
How did we break them?
Because we just boycotted them. We only used domestic oil, and we sucked up, and they were kind of screwed until they acquiesced to our demands. But Jimmy Carter has a longer legacy with the Shah of Iran and the Iranian Revolution. I'm not well versed enough in that to speak about that from an authoritative point of view, though. I just know that it's generally considered that Jimmy Carter botched all that, and there was like the whole Iranian hostage thing where they were all released the moment Reagan became president because, you know, they knew Reagan was going to bomb the shit out of them.
Right. So back on track. I mean, you're saying that the OPEC nation states don't have pull in the WTO, there's a sense of desperation among the people. So them operating at 50% of their rational capacity leaves them open to suggestion, manipulation, to either one, win a bright future for their family paid for by Saudi Arabian money.
Hold on. I have to stop for a second and call distinction here, because those Saudi oil princes are not sharing any of the money with these fundamentalists.
Say again?
I don't think that those rich Saudi oil princes are giving money to the fundamentalists. I think that they rely on U.S. might for their security, and they're walking a tightrope to not appear too pro-American, but they're walking a tightrope with Americans to not appear to be. I think several years ago there was something like 3 or 4 attempts on the decapitation attack attempts on the leadership in Pakistan.
You're talking about Pakistan. I'm talking about Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabians.
It's the same but I think it's the same situation in terms of where they have to placate the United States government enough, and they have to placate the terrorist groups enough so that they don't get invaded or taken out by terrorists.
Taken out from within.
Right.
That's
so it's
believable.
I think they're putting this impossible kind of a situation.
Well, I don't give a fuck. Like, I'm just naturally anti-absolute monarchy. I don't know. There's something in my body that likes democracy or the or Republican ideals or whatever they are. That
though.
What?
Well, do you think the absolute monarchy ever really existed? Or do you think
it exists in Saudi Arabia now, man? What are you talking about?
I mean, are you sure that it's not really backed by a hidden oligarchy?
What do you mean, a hidden oligarchy? Like basically, what is the difference between an oligarchy and a monarchy? The only difference is that one is controlled by multiple families and one is controlled by one.
Yeah, I think that's the difference.
Well, that's kind of what it's like, but still, you know how many people are in the Saudi royal family? 16,000. 16,000 people are in that one family. Approximately 2,000 of them are the ones that have any real pull. Everyone else is just kind of along for the ride.
Right. I mean, Bin Laden had 50 kids on his own, right?
I don't know. I'm sure.
Yeah, it was something. It was like 48 to 50 children of Osama bin Laden.
Yeah.
So. Right. So that's like, you know what I mean? So, but like, that's probably true. Like, look at the court of Louis XIV and the sycophantism that went on there. And, I just think that that's kind of par for the course historically.
This notion that Saudi Arabia is walking a tightrope between placating the terrorists and
placating the West, I think it's
the West is believable up to a degree, but it's like that you're like playing devil's advocate right now. I have no sympathy for the Saudi royal family. Maybe that's a problem I need to work on, and I'm the first person I would think to like be compassionate, and if I could like actually hear an honest case of a situation, maybe they did just like they just they just painted themselves into a corner. They painted themselves up into this corner, and they're surrounded by money, and they're on an island by themselves, and they're really desperate, and they're really scared, and they live every moment of their life, anticipating the worst.
Right.
Maybe that's the case, and like I have compassion for them, and I want to rescue them from that, and I want to transform the world or whatever, but that's not what I see. What I see is them in cahoots with Qatar, the UAE, Israel, and elements within the intelligence community of the United States, kind of engineering ISIS, making ISIS in order to destabilize the Assad regime, to depose him, to, I don't know, fucking try to conquer the fucking world or something. Like,
well, I mean, that's a bit like injecting AIDS to kill cancer, isn't it?
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, in the same way that we the Mujahideen, I think they were called, in Osama bin Laden, and we used them in Afghanistan, like in the 80s, to repel the Russians as their enemy, and look what that ended up turning into 9/11.
But the difference that you have between AIDS and cancer. Yeah, I guess it is a little bit like that. But the thing is this, like, it's
Right.
not really. You have the Shia, and then you have like the Sunni are the most populous, right? So
Yeah.
there's like a much larger percentage of them who are just lay Muslims. Like there are Catholics, but the vast majority of them don't go to fucking church. They don't go to mass. You know what I mean? Like they're just kind of
Right.
phoning it in. Well, it's the same with the Sunni, I would assume, but still there is this hardcore psychotic right-wing element within Sunni Islam, which I believe is foremost backed by Saudi Arabia and the UAE, the rest of the Arab states, and Israel has interest in it, as well as Turkey, and as well as the United States. They have interest in seeing that Assad goes, because this is the thing. You could say Assad fucking bombed his own people, which is still unsubstantiated by the own UN investigation that Assad ever had anything to do with that chemical attack in Ghouta. That was always unsubstantiated, and that journalist Ezra Klein came out with that masterpiece of propaganda illustrating how, oh yeah, well they certainly did. Like he just like steamrolled through it and just like immediately tossed it at the doorstep of Syria, of Assad,
Right.
but there's been no proven link. Meanwhile, it was proven that the same hallmarks of that same attack were used 3 months prior against the Syrian army. Not the Free Syrian Army. The same type of chemical attack was used against Assad's own men. So, like, who's really at fault here? Assad is not a fucking psychopath like, what do you call it? This is my case for Assad, okay? And then I'll let you go. My case for Assad is that he is a secular representative of his people who's trying to advance a secular government which does not give any space for radical Islamic extremism in the mold of Sunni Wahhabism.
I mean, but that was true of Saddam Hussein too.
Right, exactly.
So
No,
let me ask you this. Well, let me
I
throw
don't
this
know.
in.
He was killing Shia.
Well, he was a staunch secularist or secularist.
Right, but when
He
it
kicked
came,
Al Qaeda out of Baghdad, and they ended up in Kurdish territory. From what I understand, anyway, I may be wrong about that. But let me throw this at you, right?
Mhm.
So, how long? I'm gonna play on your side with this one. So, at what point was the West aware that Saddam Hussein used chemical weapons against the Kurdish civilians?
when we signed the DD Form 1348s, like transferring custody of them to him, we sold him the weapons.
And what year was that?
85?
And what year did we invade Iraq on basis of having those chemical weapons and using them against Israel?
9091.
No, we didn't invade there for that. We invaded there because he invaded Kuwait.
Oh, right, that's right. Oh, yeah, some 20 years later.
Right, so I mean, like, so really this becomes a much harder sell that that's the actual point behind
How ironic
deposing
is it?
Assad.
How ironic is it that we end up back in that country 20 years later looking for our own weapons, looking for the weapons we sold him?
You know, it's interesting. Some Iraqi generals said that those weapons got shipped to Syria via train before the invasion, before the UN inspectors even went in, which may or may not be true. Who knows?
What was the relationship like between Saddam Hussein and Assad?
I have absolutely no idea, but I know that this is gonna make you literally laugh your fucking balls off, man. But so when we invaded Iraq, was it 1991?
Yeah,
The first
1991.
Gulf War. Saddam Hussein decided to hide all his fighter jets in Iran, like when we were mass bombing, and they just didn't give them back.
Lol. You're dumb, Saddam.
Well, I mean, I'm not 100% sure that's true, but that's what I remember. My social studies professor talked about in length at the time that it was happening.
Now Russia and Iraq have tentatively agreed to some kind of security pact because Iraq sees what Russia is doing. extinguish ISIS in Syria, and they're like, yeah, we need some of that over here. So they actually just recently set up like some kind of communications center or something with which to coordinate attacks within Iraq. I think it's kind of interesting the fact that, we from where I stand, this is what I see, and I know we started this. We wanted to get into the psychology of the suicide bomber
behind the individual, right?
But I mean, what I see is, I see the United States versus Russia in some kind of Cold War 2.0. We need to keep oil cheap because Russia needs it to be at $100 a barrel in order to be profitable. So we hatched this plan with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia does not like Iran or Bashar al-Assad, and they want to see him go. So we helped to organize and engineer with the Saudis. The Saudis, I think, provided most of the money in order to stand up Daesh or whatever, in order to destabilize Syria, to depose Assad, to make that entire region, that entire area, more Sunni friendly and less secular, more extremist, less secular. Right. From where I stand, that's what I see. I do have this other special comment from Nightwatch, which was kind of an interesting article that I saw entitled Living Systems Analysis of a Terrorist Cell. And it states that periodically Nightwatch mentions living systems analysis as the basis for deriving different insights, this is a quote, about terrorists and other groups. They have a series of graphics here where they illustrate a terrorist cell instance. They're meant to be illustrative, but it's kind of interesting when you look at it how the terrorist cell does kind of, if you approach it from like a biological standpoint, a biological perspective, and you look at it in these terms, you can kind of begin to synthesize new means by which to counter it, because you're no longer looking at it in the mold of, oh, these are human beings and, kind of more complicated than they need to be, like examinations or analyses of these phenomena. If you kind of put them into the mold of a biological organism, it can open doors that might have otherwise been hidden in terms of how do you combat this, how do you defeat this kind of thing.
Right. So when I think about the ways to combat this sort of thing, so I have to ask you a question first. Have you ever listened to Dan Carlin's sort of more weekly podcast, Common Sense?
No. I didn't know he had another podcast.
Yeah, he has another podcast where he just talks about political issues in the here now, in the real time.
Really?
Yes. And he talks a lot about like this whole deal with Vladimir Putin and like Russia trying to project power to reclaim their place like on the world stage. And he's talking about like Putin doing all these things to just kind of upstage the United States, like his whole thing where he's like, let me champion Snowden to make the USA look bad.
That just fell into his lap, though. They didn't engineer that.
Well, I mean, he had to extend the hand to Snowden, right? Like Snowden probably didn't contact the Kremlin himself.
Snowden didn't have too many other options.
Well, that being said, though, like, where did those other options come from? Did Putin, like, did he contact the Kremlin in Russia, or did Russia contact him?
He flew to Russia because I think that was like his last move. I'm not sure who contacted who, but it doesn't matter. Like, Putin didn't engineer Snowden, so whatever Dan Carlin is thinking, like Snowden is a mole for Russia. He's out of his
I don't
mind.
think he was. I don't think he was saying that at all. I think he was saying that Putin was being opportunistic and trying to make Obama and the United States look bad by securing a whistleblower and making it look like Russia is more pro-freedom than the United States.
Which they're not. They're actually it's horrible for homosexuals over there. Like it's very unfriendly.
Yeah. Absolutely, but like he was more talking about what Russia's doing in terms of like military bombings, where Russia's starting to project power.
You talking about in Crimea?
Yeah. Well, no. I'm talking about in the Middle East.
Well, that was because Assad was back against the wall, and the only other base that Russia has internationally is their
Right.
submarine base at whatever in Syria.
Well, I think that it would probably be,
Tartarus.
because I don't really remember it that well. I think it would be better to have you listen to that specific Dan Carlin podcast before we go into this
Well, I don't buy
and see
this
what you think
whole.
of that.
I don't buy this whole. I mean, okay, one
Like,
thing is for sure.
he spent a couple of hours laying this out.
Russia has. I'm gonna check it out. I'm gonna check out the podcast. I love Dan Carlin, so I want to hear what he has to say about this. But and I want to say Russia had, like, after the Cold War, and I've said this countless times. After the Cold War, people think that that the KGB just like closed up shop, like shrunk any or like shut down any intelligence gathering operation against the United States, and that was that. Like, they lost the Cold War, blah blah blah. But it's just classic Russian misdirection. They didn't shut down anything. The intelligence gathering operations against the United States and U.S. interests increased. There was a triple-fold increase in the size, the breadth, and the operational capacity of the Russian intelligence gathering apparatus against the United States after the Cold War. There was no letting up. The Cold War never ended.
So here's the interesting thing about that, right? Is that from what I understand, Boris Yeltsin gave us unfettered access to the Soviet archives for like a period of several years.
Where did you hear this?
Oh, I can't remember now.
That sounds ridiculous. There was
This is like in the late '90s that I heard it.
I don't know if that's true.
Oh, I don't know if it is either. Like I'm saying, it's just what I've heard. It's unsubstantiated.
So I mean, what would that mean? Like that Russia's trying to like regain ground that it lost because drunk Boris Yeltsin gave us the keys to the archives or whatever?
No, it means that we got to see what the Soviets were doing at the time versus what we thought they were doing at the time.
Okay.
Like from the 1950s all the way up till the 1990s. So like, from what I understood, we got a 40-year like view of what was going on inside the USSR. I don't know if that's true or not. That's just what I remember.
I'm sure there were a lot of revelations that were made, but I mean, the core intelligence core that was the KGB at the time, like that was the guard, that was the old guard, and they never let up. Like they never stopped for a moment. There was a heartbeat with Yeltsin, and then like that was it. After that, when fucking Putin came to power, I think it was after Yeltsin, it was Putin, wasn't it?
No, I think it was a long time between.
There was some intermediary. It wasn't that long. It was like 8 years or something. Yeltsin died in friggin'...
Hold on.
In 2007. Like, it wasn't a lot of time. He succeeded by Putin. Yeah, he was. So, it was Yeltsin and then Putin.
Putin was 1999, and I heard we got all this access, like, when the wall came down.
Well, that was definitely pre-Yeltsin.
Yeah, the wall fell in '89. I'm not sure when. Well, so I think Gorbachev was working with Reagan a lot.
Mm-hmm.
That whole Reagan tear down this wall speech.
Mm-hmm.
Gorbachev.
Gorbachev.
Right. This is an area in which I'm very cloudy. So hold on. Hold on, Boris Yeltsin. Let me see when he attained power. Oh, really? He gained. Boris Yeltsin was in office in 1990.
Yeah, 29 May until.
But he was the first secretary of the Communist Party in 1985.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess he was like probably, I don't know how Russian internal government works, but first secretary kind of sounds like the Secretary of State. Mm-hmm. Which in the United States is third in the link of power. Mm-hmm. So I'm guessing that he was very, very high up in the top 5 in Russian government at the time.
Where
that
are
the wall
we? Like, what's our point? But so this is the point that I wanted to make was that okay, yeah, the Russian intelligence gathering apparatus tripled in size. Okay, but this notion that
What's the source on that, by the way?
yeah, I'll get a source. I'll
Okay.
add it to the links. But
Okay.
that there are countless examples of like Russian espionage taking place inside the United States, from Laura Chapman all the way back even further than that. I'll link the source. But this idea that Dan is putting forth that Russia is trying to like reclaim its lost glory or whatever on the world stage, I don't see that with Crimea. Crimea is, as Gorbachev himself said, a correction of a Soviet-era mistake. Those people were always ethnically Russian. They weren't ethnically Ukrainian. But for some reason, the Soviet Union found it wise to like cede Crimea to the Ukraine, even though those people had nothing ethnically to do with them.
That issue may be far deeper than you imagine.
How so?
Because I think it may go back to 1450.
What happened in 1450?
That's when
the Bolsheviks and the
that's when the Ottomans toppled the Byzantine Empire.
Okay.
That's when the walls of Constantinople fell.
Constantinople, aka Istanbul, right?
Right. And that was a big turning point in history, because even throughout, I'm sure you remember, there was a big issue with Islam and invading into Europe, etc., in the period before the Black Death. Like, that happened, I believe, in the 1760s to 1780s.
What does this have to do with Crimea?
Because Russia needs access to the Mediterranean Sea, but they lost it when I believe that those people initially had that access. When the Ottoman Turks crushed the the last part of the Eastern Roman Empire.
Mm-hmm.
Which there's a lot going on there with Columbus going to the east, because the Europeans lost their trade routes to India and China.
You're saying that wait a minute. You're saying that Russia needed a path to the Med.
To the Med, right? And that's what Crimea gives them.
No, they have a shoreline on the Black Sea. Crimea is not on the Mediterranean. Like, they have to go south of Crimea is Turkey, west of that is Bulgaria and Greece.
I thought there was a connection to the Mediterranean off Crimea. Are you 100% sure about that?
You can go through. There's a channel through Istanbul into the Sea of Marmara.
But Russia doesn't own Istanbul, though.
No, that's Turkish. That's Turkey.
So Russia doesn't have their own, like they have it through trade pact, is what you're saying? They have indirect access to the Mediterranean Sea?
The only way to the Mediterranean is through Istanbul, which is in Turkey. So unless they're, that would be something really interesting to look at. The relationship between Russia and Turkey. That's the really interesting one.
Doesn't the Black Sea feed into the Mediterranean, though?
Yes,
so if you have access
through Istanbul.
Well, I'm looking at the sea. Well, Crimea is directly on the Black Sea, right? I'm looking at it on a map right now.
Yeah.
So Russia can go across the Sea of Azov to Crimea and then into the Black Sea, and then the Black Sea connects to the Mediterranean. Is that correct?
Yeah, through Istanbul.
Through Istanbul, but there's still a waterway, right?
Yeah, like they would have to either be buddy with Turkey, allied with Turkey, or they would have to take over Turkey, and that's not going to happen. The United States we're so cozy with Turkey, and it pisses me off because Turkey is so repressive of freedom.
Well, from what I understand, we blocked Turkey from joining the EU, like de facto, because they refused to acknowledge the Armenian genocide.
there's been that, but we've been really kind of light-handed with that and giving them a lot of leeway in denying or in not recognizing the Armenian Holocaust.
Right.
We've been kind of soft on them because we knew we needed them, and they were integral to all of our operations in Iraq and otherwise. Like, Turkey is the linchpin. That is the fucking keyhole through which everything ends up in Europe. All of the Syrian refugees, everybody is they're going by way of Turkey, if not like through the Mediterranean Sea.
So here's the thing, though, right? Like, I'm trying to get a broader map here. 1 second.
Go to Google Maps.
So I'm looking at it right now. So the Black Sea directly feeds into the Mediterranean Sea
by way of the Sea of Marmara.
But Russia already had access without Crimea to the Black Sea.
Yeah, they already had that. They have bases all along that. They have a border right there, and then it's like Georgia, and the disputed territory between Russia and Georgia.
So it may just be about ethnic, but Hitler used the same thing to go into Austria, right?
What do you mean, like? Oh, okay.
He said that,
they were ethnically German or whatever, right?
Right, and so he used that as a pretext to go into Austria.
Right, but the thing that makes this different with Crimea is that when the Soviet Union existed, Crimea was ceded to Ukraine, I guess, as some kind of consolation or something to get them to stay in the Union. And presumably no one in Crimea, like, really took very kindly to that because they were ethnically Russian.
So what do you think the odds are maybe that Putin is just like... So let's say Putin's not really in charge.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say that there's a whole conglomerate of former KGB people that back him in his power.
Mm-hmm.
And he has to appeal to them.
Mm-hmm.
And they want him to slowly reestablish, or at least give the appearance he's reestablishing the USSR.
Mm.
And then that suddenly would make more sense given... Because, like, what's the strategic advantage of Crimea? Like, Russia had to go out on quite a limb to take that, right? Like, internationally in public opinion.
Yeah, but, I mean, I don't know if he cared so much about international opinion, because he had been steamrolling with Snowden. He had a coup with the Olympics, Sochi Olympics. That was, like, a huge thing. People in Russia fucking love Vladimir Putin. He is, like... He can do no wrong. I don't know if there's a dissenting voice against him.
So why did he go into Georgia?
He went into Georgia because weren't they going to... There was something... They were going to make some deal with... I don't know, man. I'm not educated enough. We need a fucking subject matter expert.
I think we both need to, like...
we need to pull
the
back
subject
a little bit.
And both do massive research.
Yeah,
because...
So I don't see Russia doing anything other than maybe what you said, reestablishing the USSR. Like, that's...
And only to, like, appeal to his constituents in the same way that, like, maybe George Bush... glad-handed and paid lip service to radical fundamentalist Christians.
Right. That's pretty much it.
Because I don't see the plus side of this Crimea thing. Like, they already have access to the Black Sea. It doesn't give them any greater access to the Mediterranean.
Right.
Because, like, there's way more shoreline. I mean, maybe it's like a couple 100 miles closer to the passage.
Yeah.
I don't see the upside.
Yeah, I don't see any other reason why he would go into Crimea other than to, like you said, reestablish USSR. And
in order to puff up appearances,
what's frightening is this, like, okay, Turkey might not be an EU nation state, but they're fucking NATO, which means that if something in Russia coming to Syria's defense, which was made all the more difficult by I forget who it was that denied them. I think it was Greece denied them flyover ability or something. that
Right.
if something dumb had happened along the border of Syria and Turkey, like, and a Turkish plane had gone down, and Russia had fired on a Turkish plane or whatever, like, that would have been, Turkey would have invoked Article 2 of the NATO charter, and, like, you attack one NATO station, it's like you attack them all, and we would have
Right.
really would have been in for a fucking diplomatic clusterfuck. Like, some...
Do you think Putin would push that button though?
No. I don't think so. I think...
Well, here's the interesting thing, right? Like, so when ISIS was calling for attacks
Mhm.
on shopping malls in the United States, just like within the last week,
Wait a minute.
that.
Chopping what?
No, shopping malls.
ISIS called on people to chop balls?
No, shopping malls, not chopping malls.
Okay, shopping malls. They called for
Right.
attacks on shopping malls. Okay, got it.
Within the continental United States and attacks on Washington D.C. And it would be interesting because that would put Obama in quite a precarious position, right? So let's say a big attack happened and like 500 civilians got killed in Washington D.C. from various terrorist attacks, and ISIS claimed responsibility. Barack Obama would have to retaliate with full force, or Hillary Clinton would automatically lose the presidency.
Wow, this is what's so fucked up is that the
That's true, right?
the Republican, a Republican getting elected might require a terrorist attack against the United States.
And then a feeble response by the Democrats.
Right. I guess that, but like, what about the scenario where there isn't a terrorist attack? What does that look like? I'd much rather prefer talking about that.
I really feel like Hillary Clinton has an 85% chance of winning.
I can't believe it. I don't understand why.
Because I think that the shadow of George W. Bush and the neo-Luddite kind of mentality of the Republican Party. You know what neo-Luddite is, right?
Yeah.
Right, that anti-technology,
anti-intellectualism.
They're still anti-fucking stem cell shit.
Right.
Where people are
anti-global warming.
Right. Like they've completely just alienated themselves. Like I lean right wing, but I can't do that anymore because of them.
Okay, so what were you saying?
So I think that given the current situation and the growth of Latino populations within the United States, that it's really Hillary Clinton's to lose. I think the Republican Party has done a horrific job in appropriating Latin people to vote for them.
I don't understand why people consider Hillary to be a viable candidate, given the fact that she is so closely tied to Wall Street.
Because the Republican platform is that weak.
What about Bernie?
He can't win because of the stigmatism against socialism in the United States. It's unshakable. Even left-wing people are like, eh.
I think this is the worst.
I think most left-wing people they're moderates, really.
Hillary would be an awful choice. Awful.
Yeah, but then again, versus Donald Trump.
I don't know, man. I get the sense that
or Ben Carson. I mean,
Carson never. I don't think so. Not in a million years.
But I think that the only Trump is just like the only reason I want to see Trump win is because I want to see him out narcissist Putin at a table.
Right, that's the thing.
Because I think that would be absolutely hilarious. Where Trump's just like, you're fired.
They're both like duck facing each other. It would be a duck face off.
I know, but it's like the non-cynical part of me doesn't believe that humanity's that far gone.
How weird would that be? There was an even worse choice though, like an idiocracy choice, which was a scenario in which a Ben Carson or a Kanye West would be elected, something like that. we will be full idiocracy at that point.
I mean, that's basically what Trump is.
Yeah.
What's the difference between Trump and Kanye except for like singing ability?
Yeah, pretty much intellectually equivalent.
Right, man. I mean, it's just crazy.
I don't know. Trump goes on about how he's going to make great deals. He's going to make
Here's
great
the thing, though.
deals. Like, what are you talking about?
They're not, the Republican Party isn't going to have enough House and Senate majority for Trump to really accomplish anything of terrifying. You know what I mean?
Right, that's the thing. Like, if he did get elected president, he would be kept in check by the Congress and the Senate.
Right, but then, like, what good is 4 more years of stagnation? That's what I told people when Ron Paul, like, people are like, oh my god, Ron Paul's going to change everything. I'm like, no, he's not. The establishment is just going to stonewall him for 4 years until we get another president.
What we need to do is resolve the differences between your Ron Paul libertarian and your Bernie Sanders socialist. If you could somehow synthesize those two.
But that's Jeb Bush.
What are you talking about? No way.
I mean, he's right
Jeb
down the
Bush
middle.
he's a dynastic politician.
But he's still kind of like the epitome of a moderate. I think Mitt Romney was sort of there too.
Jeb Bush talked about instituting a no-fly zone over Syria. He's not a moderate.
I mean, I'm sorry, but did Hillary Clinton not do the same thing?
Hillary did the same thing. She's not a moderate either.
Well, I mean, that's sort of when both sides... See, here's the thing, right? So, I once heard it said that when both parties disagree, we're best off, and when the parties come together, we're all getting screwed.
Yeah.
So what is the moderate position when both parties are identical?
I see what you're saying. With the moderate position is like what you might think to be the most reasonable position, but that's actually the point. That's the apex of the curve of you getting screwed.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, so let's be real. The average American can't even find fucking Syria on a map.
I know. This is a problem. Amongst others, we are close to the end of our hour, brother.
Yeah.
We didn't make a lot of progress here, but I don't think that's what the purpose of this podcast was. We're just trying to bring these topics to light, talk about them as clumsily as we might, with the limited amount of knowledge that we have. We're not experts, but at least we're talking about it. And I hope that, people that are listening are not looking to this as instructions on how to think, that people are looking to this just purely as what it is, which is just raw information expressed as well as we can, given our limited resources. So
I'm kind of just throwing out all the bullshit that I've heard over the last 10 to 15 years regarding these subjects.
Yeah, likewise. So, I mean, this was good. It's just fun. It's nice to exercise the political muscle sometimes. If we can get a subject matter expert in on this, that would be good.
Yeah, I think the odds of that are pretty low.
No, you just look up university, like Russian studies or whatever, Cold War studies, and just send them an email. Be like, hey, do you want to be on our podcast? Yeah, sure. Professors are really good about that kind of
even given relative listenership.
Yeah. I mean, if it's just for the edification of people in general, it shouldn't matter if it's one person or 100, or a million. So,
yeah, but I know how academics work from first-hand experience.
You'd be surprised, man. I've reached out to some scientists, some professors who you'd think would just never reply. Like Noam Chomsky is known to reply to every email that he gets. You know what I mean?
Interesting.
Like, people are... You can interact with these people. They're not in the ivory tower completely.
Right.
Anyway.
So, it sucks that we didn't actually get to the psychology of...
Yeah, it'll have to be 2-part. Every single one of our podcasts, Zanish, turns out to need a second part.
Well, here's the thing, is, I'm thinking that maybe we should consider 90 minutes instead of 60 for these things.
Possibly, we'll consider that. But right now, I want to thank everyone for listening. On the next podcast, check us out, Zanish and I, going for an hour and a half talking about human psychology and the suicide bomber phenomena. And if you have any money that you'd be willing to give us for this wonderful exposition, please click the PayPal link, donate. We appreciate it. We're going to be getting sponsors soon, so you'll hear me e-begging a lot less, but we appreciate every dollar that we get. Please click the PayPal link, PayPal us, getbusypodcast@gmail.com. Questions, comments, concerns, PayPal, etc. We appreciate it. Thank you very much, and we'll catch you on the next one, all right? Thank you, Zanish.
Oh, okay.
World peace.
So